Hi, everybody. I just want to make sure you can hear me okay.
Hi, Dave.
Hello.
Hi, Mary. We can see you. Can you give us a quick sound check?
Yes, I can. Good evening.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Wally from the Sullivan Chamber. I can hear you. I was just setting things up.
Hey, Wally.
Thank you.
Thanks for being our eyes and ears at City Hall.
Hi, Hugh. We can see you. Can you give us a quick sound check?
Good evening, Swati.
Thank you. Hi, Lou. We can see you. Can you give us a quick sound check?
Hi, how you doing this evening?
Thank you.
Yeah, my internet is very unstable tonight.
We'll manage. All right, how are we doing on planning board members? We're getting pretty close to
Um,
time. I guess we need Catherine.
yeah, we only have 3 right now. Oh, and Catherine just joined. Great.
Hello.
Thank you, Catherine.
Hey, Catherine.
Ted has joined. Ted, we can see you. Can you give us a quick sound check?
I can see you, and can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
And Steve has joined too. That makes all the board members attending today.
Great. So at 6:30 on the button, I will turn on the broadcast. Everybody remember to say your name when you speak. You've been through this before, so shouldn't be too new. We'll have one for the folks from MIT. We're going to have one general business item to discuss how the planning board rules will continue on, and what suspension needs to continue to take place now that we're beyond the state of emergency, but in a new phase of remote meetings that are allowed by the legislature. So that'll maybe take a few minutes, but then we'll get right into the hearing.
Good evening and welcome to the June 22nd, 2021 meeting of the Cambridge Planning Board. My name is Catherine Preston Connolly and I am the chair. This meeting is being held remotely in accordance with Section 20 of Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, signed into law on June 16th, 2021. All board members, applicants, and members of the public will state their name before speaking. All votes will be taken by roll call. Members of the public will be kept on mute until it is time for public comment. I'll give instruction for public comment at that time, and you can also find instructions on the city's webpage for remote planning board meetings. This meeting is being video and audio recorded and is being streamed live on the City of Cambridge online meeting portal and on cable television channel 22 within Cambridge. There will also be a transcript of the proceedings. I'll start by asking staff to take board member attendance and verify that all members are audible.
Thank you, Catherine. This is Jeff Roberts from Community Development. Louis Bocci, are you present and is the meeting audible to you?
Present and audible.
Thank you, Lou. H. Theodore Cohen, are you present and is the meeting audible to you?
Present and audible.
Thank you, Ted. Stephen Cohen, are you present and is the meeting audible to you?
Present and audible.
Thank you, Steve. Mary Flynn, are you present and is the meeting audible to you?
Present and audible.
Thank you, Mary. Hugh Russell, are you present and is the meeting audible to you?
I'm present and the meeting is audible.
Thank you, Hugh. Tom Sinevich, I believe is absent. Tom Sinevich, are you present? Tom is absent. Catherine Preston Connolly, are you present and is the meeting audible to you?
I'm present and audible.
Thank you, Catherine. So that is 6 planning board members present.
Okay, thank you very much. The first item is an update from the Community Development Department, and as usual, please introduce the staff present at the meeting.
Thank you, Catherine. Jeff Roberts, once again, Director of Zoning and Development, and filling in for Iram. With me tonight, as always, Swati Joseph on the Zoning and Development team, helping with the controls of the meeting. Also, Eric Thorvaldson is here from the Urban Design team in Community Development, and I believe that might be it. Fairly light staff for tonight. As for an update, as you can all see plainly, we are back in our little Zoom boxes this week. There was the interesting situation last week where the state of emergency expired on Tuesday morning, and then it wasn't until Wednesday, around the Wednesday morning, that the legislature and the state, signed into law an extension of many of the emergency policies that were in place during the state of emergency, including the ability to hold remote meetings. The city will be doing its public meetings remotely for the time being, as we look to ways to transition back to in-person meetings and looking into both technological and other tools that can be used going forward. So stay tuned, and our hope is that when we do transition back to in-person meetings, there'll be a little bit more of an advance warning, and people will be aware that that's what we're doing and when. Looking ahead to some more remote meetings, again, for the time being, we do have tonight's meeting, which has one continued public hearing item, as well as some general business. When we, I guess right after this, we'll get to discussing the planning board rules, which is something we talked about a year ago, when the planning board meeting started to take place remotely during the state of emergency. And then we'll do that before the public hearing. Next week, June 29th, we have a public hearing scheduled on a amendment to the zoning ordinance that's been proposed by the city council. It is an amendment to the green building requirements that would require an emissions accounting of buildings when they receive their certificate of occupancy, and compensating measures to take place for that will be talking about that next week. That was one that had to be refiled, and the hearing would have been a couple weeks ago, and it was changed, so it'll be June 29th. We don't have a meeting on July 6th, so we can all enjoy that week off. On July 13th, we'll be picking up meetings again, and we'll probably have a series of meetings at that point. The first meeting on July 13th, we have some public hearings scheduled. One is an amendment to a townhouse development, which is something the planning board has seen now from time to time. This is a special permit that was granted a while ago, many years ago, and is seeking to make a change. And then a special permit that's being sought at 48 Pearl Street. This is a residential building that's proposing some modifications, and it's in the Central Square Overlay District, which means that some of the modifications that are proposed are can be granted by special permit from the planning board, which is a little bit unusual. It's the kind of case that I would have looked at it and thought that maybe it was going to the BZA, but it's just the peculiarity of it being in the Central Square Overlay District. So those are the hearings that we have scheduled. We'll have some other business maybe some other business on that meeting, and other hearings as we go forward. And in terms of other updates, there's not a whole lot to say. There is going to be a city council meeting next week. They may be taking up the cannabis delivery zoning at that meeting. We'll have to see. I think they could take it up next week, or they could take it up at their summer meeting. And next week is the last city council meeting of their spring session, and then they won't have another meeting again until the beginning of August. So I think that's all I have to update for now, and I'll turn it back over to the chair briefly.
Thank you, Jeff. And as you say, it is a brief return to me, as I will just introduce this next item on the agenda, which is a discussion and possible temporary suspension of certain planning board rules while meetings are being held remotely. And I'll turn it back to you to explain to us what is before us here.
Yes, thank you, Catherine. So this is Jeff again. And you may recall, at the June 16th, 2020 meeting of the planning board was the first one that took place remotely. And at that time, the board took a vote to suspend certain rules in order to allow for remote participation at meetings while we're under that state of emergency. As we just discussed, the state authorized an extension of the emergency provisions that allowed for remote meetings, and that's the format we'll be continuing in for some period of time. I looked back over the discussion that took place a year ago. What happened was the board's action was to temporarily suspend aspects of second hold as part of their community engagement, which could involve a lot of different activities. At least one community meeting held somewhere in the proximity of the site that's open to all interested people to come in and learn about the proposal and provide input. And that's something that the planning board, acted to suspend that requirement, because during the state of emergency, there were limitations on public gatherings. Those limitations have since been relaxed. And the planning board did say that could be done so long as virtual meetings were being held to the extent possible. And there's really nothing in the planning board rules that prevents virtual meetings or other kinds of virtual outreach. So that can definitely continue, but the question comes up of whether the board would want to continue to suspend the rule requiring at least one in-person community meeting, or whether that's something that would go back to the original rules given the restrictions no longer apply. So we have already received some questions from future applicants about whether they should plan to have in-person meetings or virtual meetings or some combination of the two. Before we provide any guidance on any of that, we thought that we should talk to you about it. So that's the quick overview, and I'll turn it back over to the chair. And if we do need to look at those rules, I have them open and I can share them on my screen.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Do board members have questions for Jeff on any of the rules? If there are no questions, we can move to discussion. Ted?
Just a quick question. Jeff may not know the answer. Do you have any idea when we may switch to in-person and or some kind of hybrid format of meetings? Do you think it's weeks? Do you think it's months? Just curious if you have any idea at this point.
I don't know for sure, but I would say it's probably going to be a little while because, as I said, we'll want some lead time in order to kind of ease into those in-person or other kind of meeting formats, and we'll need some time to prepare for it and make sure our rooms and our technology is all where it needs to be. So I would say that there'll probably be at least several weeks notice rather than just next week we're going to be in person. But we're trying to work along with other boards and commissions and other city staff, the folks over at IT that have been helping us out at City Hall so much during this time period, as well as making sure that there's some consistency with other boards like the BZA and so forth. So it'll probably be a little bit of time, and you'll probably know about it further in advance.
Steve?
Going back to the question about the community input, I think the time has come that we should go back to the original approach, and that we can and should require community input in person once again.
Okay. Other comments or questions from board members? Mary?
So there is benefit to having the in-person meetings for sure. And, I think a lot of it depends on who the audience is too. For example, if you think about last week, we had an in-person meeting and it was more difficult for some of the attendees or some of the people who were interested to attend. So a virtual meeting would have been better in that case. I think in most cases, people are comfortable at this point going out to public meetings. So I think that's fine. The only hesitation I have is that we're virtual, so it seems a little strange that we would be requiring other people to be doing in person when we're remote. But I would be happy with really either, depending, for the applicant to just figure out what is the best tool for them to use at this point. So I think, again, sort of the hybrid model is fine by me.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Other thoughts? Lou?
I'll just put my 2 cents in. I'd like to see us get back to in-person meetings as soon as possible. I guess the public comment and so forth, maybe it's a good idea to do some hybrid of that, but I think the meetings are a lot more informative and in person. Thanks.
Lou, before you turn off your mic, as it were, one of the things we're trying to, I think, get to here is not just our own meetings, but what we require the applicants to do. Do you have a feeling on whether we should be requiring them to do an in-person meeting?
Yes, I think that's the public comment is one thing, but the applicant, I think it's a better outcome usually more interest in the models and the drawings. Sometimes we get different sets of drawings kind of late in the operation, and it's nice to have them in front of you.
Okay. Ted?
Yeah, I support the concept that they be required to have a in-person meeting. I think everybody benefits from it, that it's so hard to look at plans on a small screen. And, you know, as Jeff said, there's nothing that prohibits them from also having a remote meeting, but I think requiring an in-person one would be a good idea.
Okay. Hugh, I think you're the only board member who hasn't weighed in yet. Do you want to weigh in on this one?
I think there are some advantages to having remote participation at meetings. I think more people do listen in. I agree with my colleagues that the quality of information that they get, and certainly the visual information, is much reduced. So I guess I would support a hybrid solution in which there is an in-person meeting, but there is a way for people to comment and view it online.
And so, Hugh, just so I understand, is that you would require applicants not only to have an in-person meeting, but to also offer an online forum for viewing it?
I don't think I would require that.
Okay.
But I think if we do write a rule or amend the rule, we could suggest that was a way to get greater public participation.
Okay. So my sense from the board then is that in terms of our rules, we would like to no longer suspend the rule that requires applicants to have an in-person meeting as part of their public outreach. But we would also encourage them to take the lessons we've learned from the pandemic, that that outreach might be effectively supplemented by whether it's a remote meeting or online portal or some other form, that those are wonderful tools to add to a public meeting. Is that, anyone disagree with that summary of what I'm hearing from the board? Okay. So I think then it sounds like we are going to continue to temporarily suspend the provisions in subsections 6.3, 6.4, and 6.5 of the planning board rules that require physical attendance at the meeting, and allow virtual modes of participation at the planning board meetings while they're being held remotely. Jeff, I specifically omitted subsection 5.1 because it sounds like the board would like that one to no longer be suspended. Did I do that correctly, or is there, did I miss something?
I think you got it just right.
Okay. All right. So is there a motion to continue to temporarily suspend the provisions in subsections 6.3, 6.4, and 6.5 of the planning board rules?
Yes, Steve, so moved.
Mary seconds.
All right, roll call vote.
On that motion, Lou Bocci,
Yes.
Ted Cohen,
Yes.
Steve Cohen,
Yes.
Mary Flynn,
Yes.
Hugh Russell,
Yes.
Catherine Preston Connolly.
Yes.
That's all 6 members voting in favor of the temporary suspension.
Excellent. All right, then we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a continued public hearing on case PB 371, a special permit application by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to construct 2 buildings totaling 327,000 square feet of graduate student housing. And again, we'll have CDD staff summarize where we are in this process.
Thank you. It's Jeff again. I'm filling in for Daniel. This is his case, but he's on vacation this week, and he'll be doing the same for me later. This is a continuation of a case that was first heard on February 16th, 2021, and MIT proposes to construct 2 new dormitory buildings on Vassar Street. The site is located on the MIT campus in Special District 6 and Special District 11, and it's in the MIT Institutional Overlay District, and it's an allowed use. So the applicant is seeking 3 types of special permits from the planning board. There's a project review special permit under section 19.20 of the zoning ordinance, and that requires findings on urban design and transportation impact. There's special permits to allow increased height in the SD6 and SD11 zoning districts. And there's a special permit being requested to reduce the required off-street parking under section 6.35.1. The board's action is to grant or deny the special permits. The applicant has revised the design of the project in response to comments that were made the last time by the planning board, and the relevant approval criteria and the comments on the revised materials are provided in a memo from CDD. Previously, the board had received comments from Traffic, Parking, and Transportation and the Department of Public Works. I don't believe we have staff here tonight, but we can, I think those comments sort of stand as they were previously. We can do our best to answer any questions. That's it, thanks.
Great, thank you, Jeff. All right, so the presenter on behalf of the applicant is going to be Sarah Gallup. Before we get into the presentation, as was previously noted, there are only 6 planning board members present, and an affirmative vote of 5 members is needed to grant the special permit. Do you agree to proceed with just 6 members?
Yes, we understand that and we agree. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, then you'll have up to 30 minutes for your presentation, though of course we can allow additional time at our discretion. Please introduce your project team and begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And good evening, members of the planning board, members of the public, city staff. It's great to see all of you tonight. My name is Sarah Gallup. I'm in government and community relations at MIT. And we are back tonight to show you design and public realm changes that we've made to our proposed graduate housing dormitory on Vassar Street. We believe that the enhancements that we'll be sharing respond thoughtfully to your observations at our February hearing, and we hope you'll feel the same way. This cover slide is simply a reminder of the location of the site in the red outline and its immediate context. Next slide. Tonight, we plan to get right into the heart of our presentation by just briefly touching on familiar background and then focusing on the changes we've made. MIT Director of Planning John Alvarez will remind us of the project team, timeline, and requested approvals. And then Steve Kieran and Tim Peters from Kieran Timberlake will walk through the design and public realm changes. We've purposely tried to keep the presentation efficiently brief. It's just 29 slides because we know you have already spent time with our resubmission, and we appreciate that. Thank you. So let me turn it over to our Director of Planning, John Alvarez.
Thank you, Sarah, and good evening, everyone. My name is John Alvarez, and we're pleased and excited to be back before you tonight. Since our meeting in February, we've spent a good deal of time working on the scheme and have a great deal of input with our Dean of the School of Architecture and Planning, Hashim Sarkis. And we've benefited greatly from his insights and ideas. Before we proceed, I'd also like to commend Karen Timberlake for their keen ability to internalize the planning board's commentary from the February hearing and create new approaches and schemes that we think beautifully address the current concerns that were raised when we last presented to the board. Next slide, please. So just as a reminder, this is our full project team. In addition to Karen Timberlake, some key members of members of the other team are here tonight to answer any specific questions, as well as representatives from our Division of Student Life. Next slide, please. And also as a reminder, here's our project timeline, beginning with the Volpe graduate housing commitment in the fall of 2017, and then working through staff reviews, community engagement, in our first hearing this past February. The revisions process following our hearing and the resubmittal. This brings us to this evening's hearing. Our aim is to start construction in January of 2022 and occupy the building with our graduate students in the fall of 2024. Next, please. This is our original list of requested approvals that Jeff mentioned, with the recent addition of a green roof special permit, which we'll describe in more detail during our presentation. Now I'd like to turn it over to Steve Karen, founder and principal and partner at Karen Timberlake Architects. Steve?
Thank you, John, and good evening to all the members of the board. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening and to share what we believe and hope you will see as a very positive suite of revisions that we've made in response to your design review comments earlier this year. Since some months have elapsed, I'm going to begin with a very brief orientation to the project and the basics of it. As has been noted, there are two buildings. The west building is to the left. It, in turn, is split into two masses, one at 100 feet high and the other at 60 feet. They're joined by a circulation court and entry court. The east building on the right that you can see also has a 60-foot high mass along the central plaza, and the portion of that mass to the right or further east is 105 feet high. Together, they really form and frame a portal to and from Fort Washington Historic District and Park. So, next slide, please, if you can. The Central Plaza is certainly the most important feature of the urbanism of this project. It's significantly wider at 128 feet than is required. And it's a real welcoming portal, we believe, to the Cambridgeport neighborhood, through the park, across the future Grand Junction multi-use path, and into the campus and river beyond. There are also two very small urban pocket gardens of note, labeled here entry courts at each building, one at each building. And we believe they further enrich and engage the architecture with the streetscape. If you go to the next image, please. So a brief summary of the changes. There were several suggestions that you offered at your prior review. You basically said brighter. You'd like more, a brighter coloration overall, more transparency and variation, particularly at the circulation elements in the building. The word lighter was also used, less heavy Then the visual effect that resulted from the prior use of the precast cladding. You further asked that the landscape design and the passage through the central plaza and greenery within it be worked on and improved and made more straightforward and clear and with more greenery. And lastly, you asked us to extend the west cycle track further to the west, to the edge of the property. We do appreciate the thoughtfulness of these comments and believe the results that we're sharing with you this evening will project a design that has been enhanced through this process of civic review. So the overall result is reflected in this view that you're looking at. We think it's a pretty compelling view from the north. And you can see the design forming itself about that central axis from the park through the multi-use path in the foreground. In this view, you can see the lightness and elegance of those towers, which are now metal towers, and I'll go through that a bit more in a moment. We've abandoned the precast in favor of lighter metal towers, and they're poised atop brick bases. If you look at the joint in between the upper and the lower buildings, you'll see that we have increased the transparency of the central stair tower and the elevator lobbies. They're now metal and glass and open to view from without and within. And you'll also see some additional variation and engagement of the lower brick masses with the ground plane. So all those modifications across the board are here apparent. If you could go to the next image, please. We think probably among all these, the most significant transformation is the decision that the design team, the Institute, made to change from a precast concrete with thin set facade, which you can see, thin set brick facade, which you can see depicted on the left, to a much lighter and we think more elegant metal and glass facade depicted on the right. The proportions of the metal and glass facade, as you can see, are more vertical, and that verticality is formed in part by thinner horizontal spandrel panels. So we think overall the proportionality and lightness of this are a significant improvement over the precast. If you could go to the next image, please. I'm going to share with you two sets of before and after comparative views to summarize the effect of all the changes that we've made here. This is the prior view looking east along Vassar Street that we shared with you in February, along with notes about your commentary at the top about the darkness of the tonality, the lack of articulation at the stairs and the elevator lobbies, the detailing overall and the heaviness of the upper tower portion on the left side. Those were all comments you offered back in February. If you go to the next image, please. In the present design that you see here, we think you can see the positive results of the lighter, more vertical glass and metal panel facade on the left, the lighter tonality and the increased variation in the lower brick buildings, and the overall transparency and openness at both the entry courts that you can see in the center of the west building on the left. And you can also see the same in subsequent views I'll show you at the ends of those towers as they appear over the lower buildings. If you go to the next, please. Now, this is a different view that, again, this is the before, the one we shared with you in February from across the field, from across the commons. And again, as you saw in the previous image, your commentary is noted across the top. It's similar over the tonality, the materiality of the tower, etc. If you could go to the next, please. So seen from this present vantage, in the present design, you can see the higher building here now depicted in metal and glass, and the effect of it. We think it really lightens the whole of it up, and perhaps most importantly, it differentiates it. It visually drops it, the higher mass into the background and really foregrounds the boulevard-like quality of the lower brick buildings as they engage the Vassar streetscape. So all in all, we think a very positive suite of changes there. So if you could go to the next image, please. So our fundamental aspiration here is really an urbane residential architecture, one that interacts with and engages the streetscape. And I'm going to take you on a path to the east along Vassar Street with 3 views that I think reflect this quality. So in this view, in particular, you can see the west landscaped entry court and the way in which it reveals some lively views of the interior life of the building near the elevator and lobby stair, with lots of people moving back and forth and creating views from the outside in and the inside out as a lining for that new landscape courtyard. If you could go to the next image, please. This is a close-up view of the east building loggia, which you see depicted to the right here in the foreground, with some benches in it and passage through it. You can see the glade looking beyond to the west building. You can see the way there at the far end of the plaza that the new residential lounge engages both the street and the plaza with a human scale presence and really gives a frame and life to the plaza and the entry to the central plaza. Next image, please. So lastly, moving further east, the East Building courtyard is depicted here. As developed, it's more intimate and lower, and we think presents a really rich interplay of landscape and architecture, a sort of intimate urbanism here with some real visual vitality as across the day and evening as the light moves around the building and starts to open up within it. So I'm going to turn our presentation now over to Tim Peters, who's going to briefly summarize the developed building plans at the ground level, as well as some landscape improvements that you had requested at the Central Plaza, and some further development along the North Cambridgeport building facades. Tim, if you could take us away, please.
Sure. Thank you, Steve, and good evening, everyone. I'm Tim Peters. I'm a principal at Kieran Timberlake. And I'll start here on the ground floors of both buildings. First, on the East Building, here you can see the interior counterpart to the walk that Steve just presented along the Vassar Street corridor, showing how we've organized the ground floor plans to correspond to the adjacent conditions in the most meaningful and direct way. So with the East Building, where the primary resident amenity spaces are housed, those are lined up along Vassar Street to really present this expansion of the public realm through the outdoor covered loggia, as well as the interior spaces that will be active and transparent along the entire flank of that building. We also have spaces like the bike storage that we put front and center so that those have a prominent and active presence on the street. And that allows us to then suppress many of the service functions of the building. You can see on the right-hand side of the plan, we have a service and loading area that is shared with Simmons. It's actually smaller than Simmons' existing service and loading areas. We've gone to great lengths to ensure that the streetscape is pedestrian and bicycle focused. Along the north side here, you can see some residential units that are organized along what we call the North Gardens, and I'll show you that in more detail, but we're imagining the north side of this building being heavily programmed and landscaped for resident use. Next slide, please. Here on the West Building, slightly different circumstances. There's a bit of a scale shift on the street. There's also a bit of a shift in the program between these two buildings. This one's a little bit more residential focused. And the neighborhood scale with the buildings across the street, with Westgate across the street, it does sit present a different scale than the fields do across from the east building. So we've located a lounge on the east end of this building to the right-hand side of the plan that faces the central plaza and sort of marks a transition in the scale from a more civic and campus scale to one that is a little bit more residential as you head westward to the left on the plan on the west building. Again, a primary entrance court and many of the student activity and circulation spaces flanking that entrance court. A lot of landscape, a lot of visual transparency connecting Vassar Street to the courtyard, to the interior lobby lounges, and to the amenity terraces that you'll see in a moment on the north side of the building. Here I'll also note the updates to the west cycle track. You can see indicated a full extension of the elevated cycle track. For the duration of our site, we worked with CDD and TPT to come up with an agreeable solution that works with all of the utility circumstances and the at-grade conditions on this end of the building. Next slide, please. Moving now up to the roofs. These have not seen a major change since our last presentation. You may remember from the massing diagrams that there are multiple levels on these roofs. On the left-hand side, facing the central plaza, where the building is lower, 60-foot bars, we've situated most of the seen elements of the roof. So the occupiable roof terrace, the green roof, is situated at that level, and we've tried to relegate as much of the equipment and other elements that have impacts on the public realm up to the upper portions of the roof, which are on the right-hand side of the screen in enclosed penthouses and enclosed screened areas. Anywhere that's not occupied by a person or by a green roof, we're hoping to occupy with potential PV. So we are allocating space for to be PV ready and for the eventual implementation of photovoltaic arrays on relatively significant portions of these roofs wherever we don't have equipment or green roof or terrace. Next slide, please. Moving over to the west side, this is the west building roof. Similar circumstance here. Though slightly less equipment, but again, the same rules apply. We're trying to really make the most of every roof surface, get as much green roof applied to areas where we know it will thrive, get as much potential PV area where we know it will perform, and contract those equipment enclosures as much as we possibly can. This is a snapshot in time. Right now, we're at 49.5% coverage of the green roof subject area. We will continue to work on finding ways to implement green roof in every area that we believe it will thrive and become a viable green roof and a habitat at those roof levels. Next slide, please. Moving back down toward the ground into the central plaza area, here you can see an aerial view of those two low bars framing and organizing the open space between the crosswalk on Vassar Street, moving through the site all the way to the north and ultimately across the tracks to Fort Washington Park. We've worked with Cambridge Historic Cambridge Historic Commission as well as CDD to find the right balance of mobility, the right types of alignments to ensure that these two open spaces are working together as companions that flank the future Grand Junction community path. If you move to the next slide, please, I'll show you a bit more detail at the plan level. On the left-hand side, you can see the updated plan. We've worked to make sure that the paths that connect the crosswalk to the crossing at the Grand Junction Trail are the right dimension. They feel comfortable for bicycles and pedestrians to move through. We've made that 17 feet clear and organized all of the trees and the gathering spaces and the seating areas around that, and created enough porosity so that you have a sense of public use and function in the central plaza. You can see in the renderings to the right opportunities to step off of that path onto the lawn and into the seating areas adjacent to the buildings, completely open to the public, and we wanted to feel that way. You can go to the next slide, please. Here you can see on the west building, we have a lounge space, a student lounge that faces the central plaza. This again marks a bit of a point of transition along your movement westward on Vassar Street. But we do very much envision the student activity spaces at ground floor, in this case, the lounge on the east building. On the opposite side of the central plaza, we have the fitness center. We also have a stair that is glazed facing this central plaza, so that there's the right balance of activity and connection between interior space and the public use of that plaza, and opportunities to make sure that the public feels welcome in this space as well. If you move to the next slide, please. Moving around to the north side, here the central plaza can be seen from an elevated view looking back from Fort Washington Park. Here we've really tried to present buildings that present a restrained but still varied and interesting and tactile quality as you face from Fort Washington Park. And as I said before, the landscape and the programming of the North Gardens running along both flanks of these buildings will present a vibrant counterpart to the movement and the mobility that's happening along the Grand Junction path running the full length of this building. Next slide, please. And lastly, for me, looking at the spaces of the North Gardens, in the case of the top left image, you can see some stoops that we've situated along the north side of the building for entrances directly into 5 residential units. So we imagine this to be a student pedestrian street running along that north side, connecting to an amenity terrace. On the right-hand side, you can see some spaces outside of the building that students can use for cooking and gathering, active program spaces along that north side of the building to ensure that there's vibrancy and activity along those edges. So with the next slide, I'll pass it back to Steve Kieran for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Tim. So just to conclude, certainly the aspiration of everyone involved in this project is to make a great place for MIT. Turn my video on here if I can. Certainly to make a really great place for MIT students to live, graduate students to live. But we hope it is one that becomes desirable for those students, in part because of the new urbane campus architecture that has been developed here. It's an architecture we think that simultaneously engages the campus and the city through compelling ground level streetscape and landscape, and one that frames, complements, and connects Fort Washington Park across the multi-use path to the plaza, the campus, the river, and even the city beyond. So we are, with that, Madam Chair, I think we're very pleased to turn this back over to you. And I want to thank you in closing and the board for the opportunity to present this evening. And we look forward to your discussion, review, and comments.
Great. Thank you very much. All right. This is a public hearing. So any members of the public who wish to speak should now click the button that says raise hand. If you're calling in by phone, you raise your hand by pressing *9. As of 5 p.m. yesterday, the board had received no written comments on this case. Any additional written comments received after 5 p.m. yesterday will be entered into the record. I will now ask staff to unmute speakers one at a time. You should begin by saying your name and address, and staff will confirm that we can hear you. After that, you will have up to 3 minutes to speak before I ask you to wrap up.
Thank you. This is Jeff Roberts again, and just looking over the virtual audience, I don't see any hands raised at this point, so I'll just repeat the instructions for anybody that is here and thinking of making a comment. Now is your chance to do that. So please push the button that says raise hand. It should be right there on your Zoom screen with a little picture of a hand on it. You just need to click it once and your hand will go up and we'll know that you're waiting to speak. And if you're on your telephone, you can push *9 on your phone. I'll just give a few seconds for people to try to find the button if you're looking for the button. So I'm still not seeing any hands raised, so I will turn it back over to the chair.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. All right. Well, we will now move from public comment to board discussion. If there is an additional public hearing on this matter, there will be an additional opportunity for public comment at that time. But of course, as previously noted, any additional written comments may also be submitted. So we did receive, as Jeff noted at the beginning of this agenda item, that we've received application from staff at CDD, Traffic and Parking, and Public Works. CDD was the only one of those three that updated their memo with a new one in advance of this hearing. And there are staff from CDD here to answer questions. So let's turn to questions for staff or for the applicant. Any clarifying questions at this time from board members? Ted.
I just have a couple of very minor questions. In the staff memo, in reference to various spots on the low bar buildings, they were talking about the gray brick. Nothing looked gray to me, and I was just wondering what they were really talking about, or whether it was the side panels that were not red brick. I was just a bit confused. The second question is, I know, I don't believe, looking at the interior, there is any plan at the moment for any sort of cafe or food area. And I know I believe we talked about it at the last hearing. And I was wondering, and maybe this is for Jeff or for other staff members, if at some time in the future they did wish to install a cafe, would that need to come back to the planning board? Or is that something that would otherwise be allowed in the district? Or if they did have to come back to the planning board, is that something maybe we could authorize right now for future use if it were so desired? And then my third question, which I guess is for MIT, there are a number of 4-bedroom units. And I guess I was wondering, who do they intend or expect will be occupying those? I doubt that there will be many graduate student families that need 4 bedrooms. Is it viewed more as a suite for 4 roommates? Those were my questions.
Okay, thank you, Ted. As we have done in the past, I'm going to go around and get planning board questions collected and then allow the applicant and staff to respond kind of in one big bunch. So next I'll get questions from Louis Bacci. Lou?
Yes, good evening. I just shut off the camera because I was breaking up like crazy.
Understood.
I'd like someone to go over the green roof area and the mechanical enclosures and how accurate they believe the spacing that's required in these mechanical enclosures is. Can it be reduced at all? We have this green roof ordinance now, and the first time out of the blocks, we're looking to exempt 50% of it. I know they're trying to work on the PVs and see if they would like to do them. I think this is a pretty quick calculation. I'd like to see them provide 100% of the green roof. that's required, and then they can always come back for an amendment if they're going to put PVs on it or whatever. Also, it calls out a mesh mechanical enclosure. I'd like to know the details on that and how transparent it will be. It looks like it will only be about 3 feet, so I don't think it's a major issue. And I like everything you've done with the facade. Although the metal work does seem, it's starting to get a little bland. Looks like it could use some more color in it somewhere or something to make it a little more striking. I guess that's enough for now. One thing I'm cautioned about is the mixing of pedestrians, bikes, and there are an awful lot of people that will be living here, and there will be an awful lot of bicycle traffic when that cut through opens up to the Grand Junction. I don't know how you're going to handle that.
Okay, thanks, Lou. Other questions for staff or the applicant at this time? Okay, not seeing any. Sarah, why don't we turn to MIT first to address some of those questions which are best suited to your team to address.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the questions. So we'll call on David Friedrich to respond to the question about the 4-bedroom units. David?
Good evening. Hi, everyone. I'm David Friedrich, Senior Associate Dean for Housing and Residential Services at MIT. When looking at the mix of unit types to include in this building, it is geared towards students that would be single students, expecting that we would have 4 students living together as roommates. This is something that we believe complements the overall bed configuration across the campus and provides an affordable price point for those students looking for that kind of accommodation.
Okay.
Thank you, David. We'll call on Tim Peters and Steve Kieran to respond about the questions related to the green roof, mechanical enclosures, color in the metalwork. Lou's questions.
I can address the green roof question. So right now we have a roof that is situated on multiple levels with mechanical equipment located such that it can serve a very long and thin building. You can imagine horizontal distribution of ductwork and other things on a building this long can be challenging. So we have rooftop equipment situated on a small amount on the low bars. We can have the least impact there, and the greatest amount on the tops of the towers. So we're still working on the circumstances of the green roof and how much we can implement because the building is on multiple levels and it's so long and lean. There end up being smaller areas of potential green roof, these kind of strips of space that don't tend to thrive quite as well as a larger open space of green roof would, based upon our dozens of years of experience with green roofs on buildings. So we're still working on that as we work through the construction documents phase to ensure that we're providing the right amount of green roof and balancing it with the photovoltaics. Some areas of the roof aren't suited for green roofs because of either slope or because of their underlying construction. So right now we're 30% shy of the new ordinance. It's not 50%. It's 30% shy of the requirement. We will continue to work to chip away at that number again, but only in support of green roofs that we know will thrive. As far as the mechanical enclosures, we have screened areas for mechanical equipment. We're working with our engineers now to really make sure that those are as efficient and straightforward and compact as possible. But what you see on screen is a good depiction of where we are to make sure that all of those requirements are met. They're not shown as mesh. They're actually shown as opaque in the plans. So we don't have any mesh enclosures for exterior equipment on the roofs at this time. Regarding metalwork,
they were called out as mesh.
I'm not sure where that is, but we can correct that as solid.
Okay.
One point with regard to the comment about from the review by staff about gray brick panels that I think it was Ted that made. It's hard to know what type of screen someone is viewing it on and what they're actually seeing, but the intent is not gray. It's a lighter kind of more brownish red and much lighter in tonality. That's the intent. And there certainly will be a mock-up process in terms of the brick selections and colors going ahead. So that lies ahead, but the intent is not a gray brick. That was something more along the lines of what we showed in the prior presentation as opposed to this one.
Thank you for that clarification. Lou, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, I wanted to touch back with this green roof. Did I hear you say that there was a possible problem in some of the roof construction types to use a green roof on them?
No, there's not a potential problem, but we have areas, particularly the doghouse areas that you see on the lower bar roofs are of a lighter construction. They're there to conceal and encapsulate horizontal distribution of mechanical systems across those roofs so they're not exposed to the weather and not exposed to view. That's a lighter weight construction. It's suited for photovoltaics, which is what we have hopeful for that area. It would have to be increased in capacity to support a viable green roof thickness.
Yeah, I'm still curious about the hesitancy with the PV arrays. Either you're going to do them or you're not. You should. I mean, you know the output, what you can generate on the roof. I hate to see this. This is a tough situation here because we just had this ordinance passed, and like those head houses and so forth, they could be required to have green roofs if you don't have PV. There's a whole lot of interesting stuff going on here, and I would just like to have a lot of this clarified. I don't also understand why we didn't get drawings with the mechanical enclosures, at least detailed to some extent with the equipment that's going to be in them. Because you're using this square footage as an offset for your green roof, and I have no way of guessing what you're going to have inside the enclosures.
We did walk through the current roof plans with the Cambridge Inspectional Services Department as well as with CDD to ensure that we were interpreting the ordinance correctly in the areas that are exempt from the calculation for both interior penthouses as well as outdoor mixed green.
It does require 80% of the usable possible green roof area, correct?
Right, once you've extracted or
mechanical equipment in the enclosures, because I'm not sure what you're putting in there and I don't quite understand why it's going to use up so much of your roof.
Okay.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question on this topic?
Sure.
It is hard being the first ones to come in after an ordinance has been passed. And we certainly followed that ordinance with great attention and involved ourselves in some language suggestions and tried to bring forward our understanding of limitations and challenges and the potential of being able to meet what the ordinance laid out. This building had always anticipated using both PV and green roofs. That was a commitment that MIT made some time ago. Then the ordinance was passed. And so the team has been trying to, one, understand the ordinance, and thus the meetings with the ISD and CDD, and then two, to do its best to try to get as far as we can at this juncture. And what I mean by that is that our understanding of this moment in time is that we needed to declare at this time, whether or not we felt with certainty if we could meet the ordinance, or whether we needed a waiver and exemption, and thus the special permit. We're going to learn a lot more by the time we get to the building permit process, which is where we understand the detail is required. And so I just wanted you to understand where we were coming from and what our approach has been on this.
I think that's helpful. Yeah, Lou?
Another quick question, because this will affect the heights that we see. And I'm sure you don't know the answer to this, but will you be using a more vertical approach or a horizontal approach to your PV arrays?
They would be more horizontal. So we have areas of the roof that they would be a ballasted system, so they're lower in profile to the roof. Anytime we're up on a tower, a higher portion of the roof, you have higher wind loads, and we have a slightly higher tilt on those PVs.
Right, so mostly they would become visible.
They would become visible, you said? Right.
In fact, they would be visible, and we don't get to see what they look like yet.
They're actually depicted in the renderings.
I must have missed them. I didn't see them, but I'll let someone else speak for a little bit.
Thanks, Lou. Jeff, can I turn back to you? I know Ted had raised some questions that were for staff.
Yeah, Ted had this is Jeff. Ted had a question about uses that are allowed and whether, I guess, retail uses or cafe uses are allowed. So I looked back quickly at the zoning. Most of this site is in Special District 6, which follows the Residence C3 zoning district. So that's basically a residential and institutional use district. Retail uses are not allowed in that district, except, if you had kind of like a university affiliated use or like a dining service, those uses are allowed. So if there were some kind of a use that were associated with campus dining, if it were a restaurant or something, or a cafe, that would be allowed, but only retail uses are allowed in the Special District 11 portion of the site, but that's only the very, very far west end. As to what the planning board could do, so the planning board can't, approve a use that's not otherwise allowed in the zoning district. You could, as we discussed in a previous case, you could put something in the conditions of the special permit that say that if there is a space that's indicated on the plans as a potential future kind of cafe space, the planning board could say that retail uses would be authorized to the extent that the zoning district allows them. And then maybe if there is a change to the zoning at some point in the future, it could be kind of pre-approved in that way. Or at least the planning board could indicate that it wouldn't be a substantial modification to the special permit approval. So that's basically what could be done. But I think it would be helpful to do that. I think it would be important to know where, at least roughly, that kind of use would be expected to be, because otherwise it might result in a more substantial change to the plans.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
There's one additional question we'd like to answer.
Oh, good.
Lou asked a question about bicycle activity and pedestrian activity in the plaza, and Drew Stangl from OJB Landscaping will address that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you all. I believe you can see and hear me. I'm Drew Stengel with OJB Landscape Architecture, and I appreciate your time tonight addressing that comment. Starting at the streetscape, thinking about the Vassar Street connection, we've spent a lot of time studying those dimensions and materiality, and that's a continuation of something very familiar to a lot of people that will use this. And so we think that will initially start to bring people to the site and allow people to be familiar. The rhythm is very similar. Again, the dimensions, we are either meeting the minimum requirements or exceeding those. And then we have the architectural moves that are allowing us to create these kind of moments of relief along that so that we can increase pedestrian safety and ensure that the bikers have plenty of space along the cycle track. Some of those moments are the loggia condition at the east building. So that's a whole nother separate pedestrian space that people can traverse safely underneath a covered walkway. The courtyards, obviously at the main entries, signifying something more important, giving plenty of relief so that the bikers and the pedestrians can share that space and get demount from the bikes or be able to get into the front entries. Then obviously the plaza in the middle is really founded on the angle and the geometry and the connection to Fort Washington. It matches and aligns to all the primary connections and crosswalks, and it also is still kind of utilizing the materiality of the space to dictate that. Within the center, the plaza space, we last time showed you something that was right around the 15 to 16 range with the more random variation of trees. Since then, as Tim noted in the presentation tonight, we have pulled them a little bit further apart, the minimum dimension of 17 feet clear, which kind of is the happy medium between bikers, pedestrians, and still allowing for us to support that space with more pedestrian-centric environments along the edges, facing outward, facing towards the gardens. So I hope that answers your question. I'm happy to speak any more about that.
It answers some questions, but my problem is early in the day and late in the day, you're going to have a lot of traffic on the bike path that's cutting through this area. And and I hate to clutter the area up, but it seems pretty open, and originally I would like to see this area as a larger area, but that's not going to happen. But you are going to get a lot of bike and pedestrian traffic right through the middle of this place, and it's right in front of both entrances. I think some more work might have to be done on that. I don't know what the solution is, but it's going to be a problem area, at least in the beginning. I just hate to see some
on which area you're more focused is it the Central Plaza connection?
The Central Plaza,
street?
Correct.
Okay. Specifically to the Central Plaza, a lot of that design iteration that we did between that space that is more heavily trafficked, we obviously want to support that and bring some of that traffic flow. And obviously the connection to Cambridgeport is a very meaningful one. One of the issues that we've studied in great amount of detail is the connection across the actual railroad track. So thinking about going from a 17-foot clear, we still need to basically funnel everything down to the crosswalk and allow for that kind of connection to Fort Washington to not be a bottleneck there. So there's a fine line that we're walking between those two, and I hope you can kind of understand that we're trying to make sure that that's an easy connection is getting people back down to a generous pathway and get across the railroad tracks safely. And that's really where the condition's coming from on that side. As far as the opening up to the streetscape in itself, we have pulled the trees back from the streetscape, as you're seeing those as kind of bringing them into the space so that there's more surface area and hardscape area for people to interact as the crosswalk's coming through and the cycle tracks obviously traversing east to west. Where that icon number B is, kind of the view, we think of that as kind of a welcoming plaza so that people can orient themselves before they traverse through the space. As you're traversing through the space, it is obviously a shared space. So you think of activity and elements happening on the edges, and that you're starting to slow down along as you're approaching the cross. If you're coming from the north to the south, you're actually opening in kind of our arms to the campus, right? So you're coming across a small pathway, you're coming into a 17-foot kind of grove space. You still feel like you have enough room to get around, and then by the time you get to the sidewalk, it kind of opens up and allows you to choose which direction you want to go. Appreciate the comments, and we can take a closer look as well.
Understand, I think it's a nice cut through. It works well, but it's kind of congested, especially when it's very busy. That's my concern.
Understood. Thank you, sir.
Madam Chair, may I make a comment related to that?
Please.
Lou, it might also be helpful to hear from the staff on this because your good questions have been a subject of discussion with them. And in fact, the staff asked for, suggested to us a wider, more uncluttered path. And so I don't know if any of the staff want to weigh in on that, but your instincts are right, and it's something that we've been focusing on and bringing change to.
Do we have the right staff here to make those comments?
Yeah. So this is Jeff. I will just say that that I will confirm what Sarah just said, that the staff have been working very closely with MIT on this, and as noted in many of the staff comments, you know, we would recommend the continuing review of this space in particular, as well as the other proposed streetscape interventions on Vassar Street. Those should all be subject to continuing staff review. I will see if Eric knows anything about this. It's possible he's had more conversations with and the staff that have been working on this have included staff in our in CDD, within our urban design and our environment and transportation planning group, as well as traffic and parking and the Department of Public Works. It's been a lot of people working on this.
Cross-disciplinary discussion.
Definitely. Eric, did you want to add anything? Are you aware of anything that might be contributed?
Not really. We did talk about it in meetings with the applicant and raised that issue, and it has been widened since the earlier version and is more provides a clearer path from north to south. I didn't write the memo, so I'm sort of improvising as I speak here, but to me, it still seems sort of narrow, and also wonder about the orientation of the benches, that just a little more width and a little bit smoother flow through there for people going north-south, south-north would maybe be more beneficial in the long run. So we're happy to work more with the applicant on fine tuning.
Great. Thanks, Eric.
Okay.
All right. Unless there are other kind of clarifying questions, I think this is a great point to transition to more general board discussion. Hugh, I will start with you.
Okay. So I have 6 points. I'm going to start with number 6 because it was stimulated by the previous discussion about bikes on the plaza. There's a place at Harvard, it's the overpass that goes from Harvard Yard and the Cambridge Street and Broadway go under. I bicycle across that upper level all the time, at least every time I'm trying to get home from Harvard Square in my bike. It's actually a much busier area, and part of the problem is that the fence on Harvard Yard means visibility to a bicyclist of pedestrians who are about to step out in your path is quite limited. What happens, and they're often bikes doing what I'm doing, is the bicyclists slow down. And so people have learned that you just have to, you can go a little faster than the pedestrians, but you have to be more pedestrian than car oriented when you go through there. And I think maybe signage might be a way to start out, just suggest that bicyclists slow down because they're mixing with pedestrians. I think it'll work. And I think eventually people will get that idea. As a bicyclist, I'd also say this may not be a very desirable crossing, because if you're living in Cambridgeport and wanting to get to a lab or a classroom at the Institute, crossing at this point, the only advantage is you get to Vassar Street with the Vassar Street bike lanes that go of like the whole length of the campus. But you know, Waverly Street is not very busy. You can go faster coming through and around. The Fort Washington is kind of it's circuitous slightly. So I think this is not going to be a real problem if the bicyclists behave themselves. And so now I'm going to my number 1 point. I read the tree study and I was surprised to find that you're asking to buy your way out of a small portion of the caliper replacement. And the reason seems to be you're using really small trees, only 2-inch or 3-inch trees. Now, the trees depicted at the central crossing look to me to be more like 6 to 8 inches when this photograph, i.e. it's not a photograph, but was taken. So if you imagine those as little sticks, 2 inches and 3 inches, it's not a very nice space. So I think you should increase the caliper of the trees in the central plaza area to maybe 5 inches or 6 inches, so that this space achieves its visual appearance much sooner. I would note that I was the architect of the Harvard Undergraduate Science Center, and we planted 12-inch trees along the former Kirkland Street because Sir, who was about 70 years old, didn't want to wait to see them grow. He wanted to see them. All those trees survived. They're magnificent now, but it is 50 years later. They were pretty great when they first went up. I think the architectural changes are very successful. I'm really quite pleased. The only thing I hate is that you somehow bought a bad batch of red brick, and there's a bunch of very light bricks mixed into that mix, and the masons didn't do their job of leaving them out. It reminds me of cheap restaurants that used antique brick to make themselves look old with, you know, like occasional white painted bricks mixed in as if the brick had come from a historic building that had been demolished. So I think the mix and the range of the brick needs to be watched carefully. I understand that you want to have range and that it's difficult to get rendering programs that achieve your intentions. But I will tell you a story about Cy Mintz, who is a very good architect in Boston. And on his own building, he put up a brick penthouse. It was right in the middle of the Quincy Marketplace. And there were some light bricks in there. And the design reviewers, after they were in place, had a hissy fit. And so Cy went out himself and painted the 2 light bricks with stain, brick by brick. Said it took him less than a morning. I don't want to have you do that, but if it shows up like you're rendering, I might be leaning on you to do that. On the green roof question, there's nothing in the graphics you showed tonight that explains the dog houses very well. I guess maybe on page sheet 25, you can kind of see what you're talking about. If you could switch to that sheet. Sorry, it says 25 on the side, but it's the one that's looking at the central, yeah. So, great, go back to the one you just had. So there are these white areas that are raised up about 3 feet. And these, I think, are what you're referring to as dog houses. And they're strong enough to support ballasted solar collectors, but somehow they're not strong enough to support extensive green roofs. So I think what you need to do is, if you don't put solar collectors on them initially, you need to commit to putting extensive green roofs on them. These are roofs that are very shallow, very lightweight. They're in plastic modules. They're very light. I'm sure you can structure that to support that kind of a green roof. Now, we still have to give you relief because you still aren't up to the ordinance requirement if you put the PV panels up. And, you know, you can argue which is more valuable for the environment. So I think it should be possible to do either, but that you shouldn't be allowed to do what shows here, which is a non-green, non-solar roof over a large area of the lower portions. On the cafe use made me made me wonder about how are these students going to eat? And then most undergraduate dorms have food service. Most of the dorms that face on the other side of the athletic fields, I believe, have food service in them because they're undergraduates. So I'll admit to not having been in some of those buildings for 50 years, but it was clear from the smell of the basement corridor that there was food service. And Jeff says, if your food service is institutional, as opposed to open to the public, then you've got the right to do it. I'd like to make sure that's clear because I think these students are going to want to be able to eat. I'm trying to imagine, is there a walkable supermarket? And I'm not sure there is one. I mean, Trader Joe's is quite a distance away. And so the kitchens aren't detailed in the floor plans, but it appears that there are at least strip kitchens in some or all of the units, so that maybe the preference for by the grad students is to be able to cook some meals in their own spaces and use either other MIT cafeterias that may be open to them or other food service that's closer to where their labs are. But I think we want to make it clear that if you choose to have food service, which I frankly think would be, it's good to have some food service that people hang out if they have some food. It's got social benefits. You know, I think it might be pretty cool if you could, you know, stop by someplace in your dorm and pick up something you could microwave up for dinner. Might be quite convenient. I think as long as these are not open to the public, as except when accompanied by an MIT person, that would probably pass the test of being usable. If it's a McDonald's that anybody can walk into, then I think you need the special permit relief that we can't give you. So those are my comments. I really think this is, well, I'll make one final comment. this is going to be quite an assemblage of dormitories and tall dormitories on the north side of Vassar Street. I was down there a couple of days ago. The one we approved a couple of years ago appears to be ready to go. Maybe it is in use, it's unclear to me. That Simmons Hall, these two large buildings, it's really quite an urban design feature. It's largely facing a large open space. And on the other side, there are 6-story, 5-story brick dormitories facing you across the open space. Yes, there's an Eastgate Tower. That's fine. So it's quite a change in relatively few years. But I think MIT stepping up to the plate, providing housing. This is a very logical site. Many institutional uses simply wouldn't fit in the dimension available. So it's a great housing site. So I certainly commend the Institute for first polling their grad students 6 or 7 years ago, and then following up on the results of that poll that additional graduate student housing would be desirable to these students. So I'm prepared to go forward with approving this tonight with the appropriate conditions that address the issues that we've been discussing.
Okay, thank you, Hugh. It's a tough act to follow, but is any board member up to that? Mary, thank you.
There's a simple way to do it. I agree with you. It's that simple. Well, first I want to thank you for reading all of the tree information, because I looked at some of it, but I did not pick up on the caliper issue, and I think it's a very good point. So I definitely feel that the trees on the plaza should be larger. So again, thank you, Hugh, for that. I think the architectural changes are very, very responsive to the comments that the board had at the last meeting. You know, certainly we all know that there will be ongoing review, there will be the mock-up. So, you know, the detailing of the materials and everything is yet to come. But I like the changes in the materials, the change in the coloration. I think the window treatment is much improved. And I think it really is a nice addition to the whole Vassar Street streetscape at this point. I think you guys have done a very nice job. I agree with Hugh and Lou also on the concerns about the green roof issue, and I think that is another thing that should be subject to ongoing review. I agree with you. It can be a combination of the two, green and the photovoltaic, but yeah, we don't want to see a condition like is shown in this particular slide, where you don't have either. But I have every confidence that MIT will do its best to come as close to the requirement as possible, given that it's a new ordinance and has all sorts of issues attached to it. Just on the cafe use, I think back in February we talked about food service at this site, and I think at that meeting that one of the staff that was involved with student life or whatever talked about shuttle services and things of that nature that took the students to like grocery stores and all that sort of thing. Because I too had that same thought early on, that you kind of, even though it's a lovely setting, you're really not close to any amenities. and that was the response before, but I do think that it is correct that if there is something there that people can go to, whether it's just to, grab a sandwich or, some small thing like Hugh said that they're going to go and microwave in their apartment, that would be helpful. I don't see the need for it to be public at all. But I think it would help overall to enliven the plaza and be a good thing for the students. So I too am feeling pretty positive about this, and agree that there are still topics for ongoing review, but I think we can approve it and follow up on those with staff as needed.
Great. Thank you, Mary.
Mm-hmm.
Steve?
Just a few comments. In general, good project and good revisions since last go around. Two comments. One on the trees. I missed that altogether, but Hugh brought that up. It may not be the biggest issue in the world, but trees are important. It will be important to everybody involved, and I don't know if everybody was even aware of how small these trees are actually called out for. I think you can't install huge trees. They're too expensive, and when they're too large, they're at risk. But the ones that are spec'd here are too small, and you should increase the size. The other general comment I have, it was about retail at this location. And as I think about it, even though this is a public way, it's really in the middle of the MIT campus. And this building and this location really affects primarily MIT and their students and faculty and so forth. And it is pretty far from the retail areas, and there are going to be a lot of people here. And it seems to me, from my perspective, that I would give MIT a lot of leeway and a lot of flexibility about whatever retail they would be inclined to install here to serve their people and their students and staff. Now, there seems to be some limitation on the zoning, and it may be that they will need a variance to get certain retail here. But I think I would personally say and urge to us that if MIT wishes to install some retail services here, that we would either approve it or that we would support that request if they need to get a variance. Because I think it makes sense to have more retail here. And again, if MIT believes that to be the case and desires to have more retail here, I would encourage them to do so. So anyway, so trees and retail, I think they're both important issues, but the big picture is still that this is a good design, an improved design, certainly one that I would support and approve, and I believe this board should and will support and approve.
Great, thank you, Steve. Ted?
Okay, well, I agree with most everything my colleagues have said. I just want to say that on the cafe issue, why I raised it is not necessarily to see retail there, but there are going to be 600 to 700 people living in this complex. And regardless of what MIT may think right now, I think there's going to be tremendous pressure from the occupants at some point to have something like a Starbucks where people can just go down and get a cup of coffee, sit around together, have a snack, talk about things. And so my point was really, if it was possible to address that now, to leave it open without a requirement of coming back to us or the BZA at some future time. But I think it's been talked about enough. I really like the redesign. I think it is really a massive improvement over what we had before. I think it's really quite attractive. I think the towers read very well with Simmons Hall. There is only one thing about it that really bugs me, and I would suggest that the designers and staff think about it, which is the entry to the west building. There's just a big blank brick wall facing Vassar Street. Unless the intent is to put somebody's name in 10-foot letters on the wall, or to put a sculpture or some artwork or something, it just seems like it's a big blank space that ought to be rethought. Maybe it's turned into glass, maybe I don't know what should be done with it. Certainly wouldn't hold me up from saying otherwise, that I think it's a great project that ought to be approved, and we can approve now. But I really think that the proponents and staff ought to think about that. I think I agree with you that the pedestrians and the bicyclists will figure out a way to coexist with the central court. I mean, there are railroad tracks there. They're going to have to get off their bikes to cross the railroad tracks. They're going to have to learn how to deal with each other. And, yes, bigger would be better, but assuming that's not going to happen, I think it's a fine design. I think others have talked about the green roof in much more knowledgeably than I could. And so I'm perfectly happy to go along with my colleagues on their feelings about the green roof. But yes, I agree that what we're seeing here on sheet 24 is not what was intended from the recent ordinance.
Great, thank you, Ted. Lou.
Just a little clarification. The increased traffic that I expect to be here is not going to be coming from Washington, Fort Washington, or even the general neighborhood. There's going to be a new bike lane, a bike track here. The Grand Junction is going to be here. Now, this is going to be a major exit from the Grand Junction. That's my concern, is that there's probably several hundred bikes that are going to come through there within a couple of hours in the morning and evening. That was my concern more than anything. And I did pick up on Hugh's caliber, small caliber trees. Those will be destroyed in the first week at 2 inches. There won't be a tree left here. And then do we put tree guards and take up more space? These were the issues that were there. Above all of this, generally it's a really well thought out plan. Now, I do have a problem with these very large mechanical enclosures. I'm not sure what's going in them, and I do understand the building is kind of sprawling. Probably should have backed it up a little bit and made a bigger opening between them. Could have made those lower buildings taller. The thing that really surprised me the most, and this is just a comment, and that may be one of the problems with having some retail on the first floor, is the first floor of these lower buildings, about a third to a half of the building is bike storage. So there's not a lot of room on the ground floor. So I don't think I have anything to hold this up with at the time. So I think it should go forward, but we need to do something to put a little more teeth into this, review by staff.
Okay. All right. Well, my colleagues have done an exemplary job of reviewing the issues I think we would want to address here. So with that, Jeff, should we go through findings first, or do you want to confirm that we have that staff has all the conditions above and beyond those in the staff memos already summarized? Yeah.
So what I would suggest, I'll review what I've got, and we'll see if the board members are feel that that's covered everything. Great. It might be good. Some of these we haven't, or at least and maybe we don't have the right staff here to confirm whether we've reviewed all these details with the applicant's team. So it might be helpful to get a response on these conditions, because if there is something that needs further discussion, now would be a good time to do it, and not later when it's just left to staff. So the ones I had, so just with regard to the use, we can work in a condition that says that food service uses at the ground story are permitted to the extent allowed by zoning, and we could leave it fairly open-ended so that it could be an institutional food service use, but it would still just be the planning board saying that that is allowed as a use, that it doesn't require coming back to the planning board if they're doing it and it's allowed by zoning. And even if it has to go to the BZA, then it's the planning board would just be commenting on it at that point. It wouldn't have to come back to amend the special permit. So that I think we can cover. I think I made a note just about correct, and this was just from the applicants, correcting something about the rooftop mechanical enclosure being solid rather than mesh. But that's something that can be covered in staff review. There's I believe it's a proposed condition to increase the caliper of trees in the Central Plaza area to approximately 5 to 6 inches. So that's another thing that we would add. And then there would be the proposed condition. This would be, I guess, as a condition to the green roofs reduction. And I apologize for not covering that at the beginning, so I won't go into it now. I think it's been discussed pretty thoroughly, but I can, if there's any further questions on that provision or the conditions in the zoning, I can discuss it. But I think the planning board suggested that the approval be conditioned on those what they're calling on their plans, the doghouse enclosures, the lower rooftop mechanical enclosures, be either solar energy if they're not being used for green roofs, or that they be designed to accommodate green roof area. Just beyond that, I because I didn't mention it, the one mandated condition in the zoning ordinance for the green roof reduction is that any reduction is compensated by a per square foot payment to the Affordable Housing Trust. That payment to be determined based on the average cost of design, installation, and maintenance of green roof area, which is something that we will be, the staff will, now that the zoning is in effect, will be working on determining what that cost is. We don't have that cost yet. So that's the green roofs. And then one more, I guess the last item was to add to continuing staff review the brick wall that kind of projects on the west building along the Vassar Street side.
All right. Thank you for that, Jeff. Hugh, did we miss something there?
I was just stretching.
Oh, okay. Your hand was raised, so. And you had done such a good job of enumerating the issues for the board at the beginning of our discussion. I figured if anyone would know if we'd missed something, it was you. Do any other board members have anything else that we want to make sure staff include in the decision? Okay, since I think the biggest kind of new ask for condition from the board here then is the caliper inch increase. Sarah or someone from MIT, do you want to weigh in on whether or not that all of these conditions, including that one, are acceptable?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We could comment on what we see as sort of the major suggestions, as you're saying. May we comment first on PV? Because and I think everybody understands this, even though we've been working hard to make sure we understand the ordinance, but I think everyone understands that solar, which is our intention at this building, does not count in our situation towards the ordinance. Institutional use is not permitted to meet the ordinance requirements via solar. So, so we're in an unusual situation. It's just the way it's written. But our intention is to have solar on this. It's always been our intention to have solar on the building. It's just that solar doesn't help us meet the ordinance. We have with us tonight our Vice President for Campus Services and Stewardship, Joe Higgins. And I'd love for Joe to just say a word about our plans and intentions on this building.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Planning Board members, for the wonderful feedback and comments tonight. I do very much appreciate Lou's and Hugh's comments on the green roof and the photovoltaic roof. So we're pushing our design team to sort of get the best of both worlds. And we as MIT are definitely committed to a combination of both for this project. So we have made a commitment as MIT to add a significant amount of rooftop solar across our campus as part of our Fast Forward Climate Action Plan. And this is a prime location. We're counting on 130 kilowatts to be installed across both of these buildings to contribute towards that goal. So what you might see here is sort of empty roofs, but they're really spoken for and committed to on behalf of our community as a prime location. So this isn't like something we're never going to come back and do. This is something we are committed as an institute to do. So it is really a combination of both, as many of you had suggested. So I just wanted to make sure that when we left here tonight, that there was no doubt in anyone's mind that it is there. The photovoltaic panels will be on there as we had rendered out, just so we could see sort of what they look like from the different perspectives. It's just that this image here didn't really capture that.
All right, thank you.
And we tried to encourage the council to allow solar to be counted, but it didn't turn out that way. And so that's why we haven't focused on it here, because we can't, the solar won't count towards the meeting of the ordinance.
Before you go on from that, Sarah, Mary, did you have a question on it?
Yeah, so does that mean, Sarah, that you have to make the financial contribution?
Right, that's why we had to seek the special permit tonight, because the solar doesn't count, but we're doing the solar. So, but as our architect said, we're still working on it. You know, we would like to continue to increase the percentage, but at this moment in time, we in order to declare to you what we think we can do, we had to ask for the special permit.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And then, Madam Chair, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Lou had a question as well.
More of a statement question.
Okay.
you have such a small percentage of your required green roof. This is a step in the wrong direction for us with a brand new ordinance. That's my whole problem with this. This has gone for years trying to get this ordinance passed. Finally did. And to tell you the truth, I'm not really that much of a proponent for some of the green roof, but that's what we have. So if people keep on buying their way out of it and buying their way out of this and that, all our work is for naught.
Well, hopefully it at least gets us good contributions to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, but it doesn't achieve its desired purpose. That's for sure, Lou.
Yeah, I can't see the equation with the 3-decker somewhere with a 8x10 piece of green roof on it being the equivalent to this. That's my
understood.
And Madam Chair, we could also address the canopy, the caliber issue. So we'll call on Drew Stengel from OJB to address that.
That'd be great.
Thank you all. So regarding the trees in the plaza, and my apologies if there was any misnomenclatures or misunderstandings on the mitigation document, but currently our largest trees are slated for the growth. They are currently at 4 inches caliber, and we understand that that still is relatively reasonable in size. The height requirements of that is roughly 30 feet, and the clear height of those would be climbed up to around 7 to 8 feet to ensure that there's clear heights as you kind of come through that space. The smaller trees that are noted on our mitigation plan are primarily being utilized in really tight spaces. So the 1 or the 2 inch trees that were mentioned are mostly on the north gardens and some of these smaller areas shown on the screen here. That's a couple different reasons we're doing that. One is to increase diversity on campus so that we can really start to help that urban canopy in Cambridge and get some more diversity of species. It also allows us to manage and mitigate kind of around our utilities as well as stormwater retention our stormwater system on the north side of the building. And the other concern that we have with extremely large trees, somewhat in the newer generations, we are very focused on very healthy and sustainable systems. So the plaza that has the large trees and down the middle is a structural soil system that is a elevated or a kind of plinth of pavers that are over the top, ensuring that the health of the trees will be vigorous and grow quickly. And that's kind of just wanted to clear the air there, and hopefully that helps everybody understand kind of the complexities of the mitigation plan. And we are actively trying to put as many trees on this site as pretty much physically possible.
Hugh, did you want to follow up on that?
So I think I understand the thinking and the intentions on the plaza, and but I still think they shouldn't buy their way out of the tree ordinance. They should do some size increases so they can meet the ordinance on their own site. I don't think they're too far off. I think, trees are usually specified in a range. So a 2 inch tree is actually probably 2 to 2.5 inches. 3 inch tree is 3 to 3.5 inches. So they may actually, if you count the 1/2 inches, if you were to go out there at when it was all planted, you might conform. But I think they should just conform, adjust sizes so they get to that point, and not buy their way out.
Okay. So I would, for one, would agree with that sentiment. Does the applicant have a problem with a condition that requires conformance with the tree, the caliper inches themselves without making a payment?
So I don't know that we know the answer to that right now.
Okay.
And so I wonder if it can be, a suggestion and let us work on it. Is that possible, Madam Chair?
Well, let me ask staff. Typically, staff does not like to be put in the position of not having clear direction from the board. But I think the board's intent here is fairly clear. So, Jeff, what do you think? Is this something where we could recommend that MIT meet the requirements with actual caliper inches?
Yeah, so my sense is that what I'm hearing is the board would like for the requirement of the tree ordinance to be met on site, and you know, currently you can meet it with a combination of on site and then making a contribution. You know, it's always it's always sort of the purpose of having that option of the payment is that when you actually get into the details and try to work it out, you know, you have a way to deal with unexpected circumstances. I know one of the things that is somewhat of a recurring issue is when you look at tree plantings on the plans and then you actually get out into the field and you have to deal with utilities and other site conditions. Sometimes it's actually the city that might say, well, you can't actually, do that. You can't plant a tree there, and it becomes a little bit complicated. And usually there has to be some flexibility for the city to work with the property owner to make sure that, and usually we try to get as many trees in place as possible, as shown on the plans, and even beyond that where possible. How to approach that in the special permit conditions. I can't think that we've ever put that explicitly in the special permit conditions, that it has to be it has to meet the caliper inches on site. But there's a first time for everything, and it does seem like something the board feels strongly about. So one of the ways we could approach it is to put that as a condition, but to have a bit of a relief valve. We may put in as a condition that the tree plan would have to come back and be shown to the planning board, and the planning board would have to assess if the plans of any kind of revised plans and planting program have in fact been done in a way that actually maximizes the tree caliper inches on site. And in that case, the planning board could give authorization to making the rest up with a payment. So that, I guess that's the best I can think of, is to put it as a condition, but to leave the relief valve that it could be modified. But I think we would certainly want it to be subject to review by the city arborist. That's what we always do with tree planting conditions. And we would also, we could also say it requires a return trip to the planning board, at least to explain what happened and how it arrived at where it did.
That sounds like an eminently sensible way to handle that. Hugh, did you want to comment on Jeff's suggestion or the issue in general?
The last sentence of Jeff said, it suggested to me that our condition could say the tree ordinance should be met on site unless the city arborist determines that this is not practical to do.
Lou?
Yes, looking on their utility plan, there are several utilities right in line, going perpendicular to this line of trees. So at some point, it's going to need some engineering work to make these clear spaces. That's all you're going to have to do, is clear the areas for these trees. And I agree, the caliper inches need to be increased in this area. Snow removal, just general wear and tear on these small trees. I've noticed in the areas that are being planted in the city now, we're getting some very small trees. Trees that would probably called out as 3-inch that now are not quite even 2-inch. I'm sure there's a supply problem at some point for some of this, but it takes so long to get an 1.5-inch, 2-inch caliber tree to a usable size that creates any shade that in this location, it really needs to be more immediate. And just a side note, it'll give the pedestrians some way to hide.
Jeff, what are your thoughts about allowing the city arborist to determine it's not practical versus having a recommendation from the arborist and presentation to the planning board?
I mean, I think that's fine too. We can handle it that way. It's just a matter of, sometimes, I mean, often we do this usually as a standard condition, is that if the plans start to change so much that that staff starts to have to, scratch our heads as to whether it's, within bounds, then, we always like to have the option of bringing it back to the planning board as an update.
Yeah.
So we would still do that. But if the board feels like all things being equal, you don't necessarily need to see it again. If, the city arborist makes that determination, then we can leave it as a staff determination. And so it's really a question of whether the board would want to see it again or not under that circumstance.
I think, and I love to hear from other board members on this. I think that if the city arborist has determined that that the maximum practical caliber inches have been met on site, that they can do, and that the remainder has to be made up with a payment. I don't feel the need to second guess that, but other people may have. Oh, I'm seeing thumbs up from Hugh and Ted. So 2 from Louis, I tell you. So yeah, I think we can defer to the city arborist on this, Jeff. And we've made our preference clear, but at the same time, the point about the utilities, I think, is and the need for flexibility when the city is asking them to do something different is an important one. All right. So, Sarah, let me just circle back to you then. With those 2 major issues kind of addressed, do you feel comfortable with the other conditions and subjects for continuing design review that Jeff had listed out previously?
We do, Madam Chair.
Great. Okay. All right. So, I think the time has come then for me to kind of quickly go through the findings we need to make for all the various relief. And as usual, as I get, I'll go through for each special permit and stop for each of them and just ask if any board members have any concerns about making those findings. So let's start with the project review special permit. We need to make the finding that the project will have no substantial adverse impact on city traffic within the study area upon review of the traffic impact indicators analyzed in the TIS and mitigation efforts proposed, and that the project is consistent with the urban design objectives of the city as set forth in section 19.30. We, as noted before, we have a memo from traffic and parking that details the conditions and mitigation efforts that they felt were would allow the applicant to achieve those with those conditions. Do any board members have concerns about making those findings? Okay, hearing none. The next is a special permit to reduce the required parking. We need to find that the lesser amount of parking will not cause excessive congestion, endanger public safety, substantially reduce parking availability for other uses, or otherwise adversely impact the neighborhood, or will provide positive environmental or other benefits to the users of the lot in the neighborhood, including assisting in the provision of affordable housing units. Do any board members have concerns about making those findings? No. Good. All right. Special permit to increase building height in SD6 to make the following findings. The height of the other buildings or portions of buildings constructed in the district is reduced to significantly below the 100-foot height permitted as of right. In the vicinity of Fort Washington, buildings are constructed below the 100-foot height permitted, or green space is created so as to increase views from Fort Washington across the MIT campus to the river and to the Boston skyline beyond. The view corridors along residential Cambridgeport streets, such as Erie and Pacific streets, are uninterrupted by buildings wherever possible. Green space is created in the district at grade where it can be visible to the general public. And buildings are distributed in the district so as to create visual penetration as viewed from the residential Cambridgeport neighborhood to the MIT campus and the river beyond. Do any board members have concerns about making any of those findings? Seeing none. Yeah, I think that one in particular, the design is very responsive to, with the lower buildings being right closest to Fort Washington, the green space centered on it. Reduction of green roofs requirement. The planning board may grant a special permit to reduce the required green roof area by solar green roof area or solar energy system below the area required by section 22.35.2, provided that each square foot so reduced be compensated by unit price contribution to the Cambridge Affordable Housing Trust. That's fairly straightforward. They have agreed, they understand yes, Lou.
Should we okay that provision without knowing what we're going to end up with?
I think the condition that has been discussed here tonight is that we're going to end up with either more green roof or solar, and not just blank space. So I would say that is a condition that this board has suggested putting on this particular special permit. If board members, I for one am comfortable with having them choose between those two. But if other board members have a problem with that, this would be the time to say so. I think the board has been very clear that what we don't want is the kind of thin ribbon of green roof around blank space. You know, we either want a great deal more green roof, even if it is reduced, or we want that space atop the dog houses to be PV. Hugh.
It appears that the green ordinance just passed says isn't interested in solar collectors, and that's probably a defect that we should ask staff to look into or explain to us the thinking of the council in enacting this. I don't think it affects our decision in this case, but I think we ought to follow up on that.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think Sarah explained well that, you know, even if they had drawn the solar collectors on top of all the dog houses such that it was clear that that was, you know, they were 100% sure that they were going with solar over the whole area, they would still need this special permit. Yeah. Ted.
I guess I'm also
sorry.
Convinced that there will be solar collectors on this building because of the testimony that was given to us in the question and answer session, that this is a institute priority, and it's a little too early to know exactly how it's going to sort out. But there are going to be solar collectors there, there's going to be green roof there, and they're going to do the best they can. And I believe that, and I think our decision should reflect that we all believe that. Maybe I'm
Right.
pushing it too hard.
And as with other things, if staff believes that what the final drawings reflect it differs significantly from that, they can always bring it back for our determination as to whether or not what's being proposed complies with what we approved. Let me go to Ted, and then Lou will come back to you.
Well, I was just going to remind people that assuming they are solar collectors, they're still going to have to make a contribution to the Affordable Housing Trust.
That's right.
And so that, you know, to the extent it's not a green roof, the city is still getting the benefit out of it.
Yep. Lou?
Again, my only problem with this is it seems like those doghouse mechanical enclosures are designed specifically to exclude green roof. And I don't know how large they have to be, and there's no evidence that they need to be as large as they do, except possibly that they are going to get BVs on them and they need that square footage to be able to generate the power. It's just skirting this issue with the green roof by designing something in a different way and not giving any information of what's going to be there. Bothers me. That's the only part. I don't think, it's not that I don't think MIT is going to do what they can to provide both. It's just, it's too easy to get around this the first time out of the box.
All right. All right, then let's see. The next special permit we need to make findings for is to increase building height in SD11. Special permits here will normally be granted if the zoning requirements are met, unless it is found not to be in the public interest due to one of the criteria enumerated in section 10.43.
Yeah, Catherine, I think that the indication there, the page sort of cut off in a funny place.
Yep.
Is that there aren't any additional criteria specifically for the height in SD11. It's just the general special permit criteria apply at that point.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. So does anyone have any problem with the increased height for SD11 as well? Nope. Okay. Did I miss any of the special permits we need to make findings on? I'm not seeing any others. Good. All right. Then, in light of that, so is there a motion to grant the requested special permits with the conditions discussed and in staff memos from CDD, Traffic, Parking, and Transportation, and DPW after making the required findings we've just gone over, and that the proposal conforms to the applicable criteria in the zoning ordinance?
So moved.
So moved.
Okay, I've got Hugh moved, Steve seconded. All right, then we'll do a roll call vote.
On the motion to grant the requested special permits, Lou Bocci,
Yes.
Ted Cohen,
Yes.
Steve Cohen,
Yes.
Mary Flynn,
Yes.
Hugh Russell,
Yes.
Catherine Preston Connolly.
Yes.
That's all 6 members voting in favor to grant.
Excellent.